The Invisible Man 2020 is directed and written by Leigh Whannell, the screenplay writer behind many iconic horror films including Insidious and Saw, and it's most notably starring Elizabeth Moss as Cecilia Cass, who's been living with a very abusive and control-freak husband for quite some time, and she narrowly escapes and has the Lanier family who offers to let her live with them. But this husband finds a way to become invisible through this advanced technological suit and begins to start stalking her and tormenting her with her life and her family relationships. And while this is obviously not original material by any means, this is not a remake either. This is an entirely different plot and storyline from the original film adaptation of H.G. Wells' novel, and it takes place in a present age where phones and computers exist, where people have access to security cameras and everything like that. This film not only is a great horror and has some great scares and an unsettling atmosphere, but it's also a great thriller. It's filled with suspense just from the opening scene alone. I really do love how they're able to generate a lot of horror and suspense in this film off of a lot of ideas that are very grounded in reality, especially the idea of abuse. People who are pure control freaks and will stop at nothing to take control of another person's life. Those are ideas that feel very grounded in reality. Of course, the idea of a person having a suit that makes them invisible, well, that's not realistic at all, but a lot of aspects to this do feel like more of an art house film. I wouldn't go as far as to say it's an all-out art house film, but a lot of the qualities of the horror of this film really resemble something like an art house or A24 film. And that's what's really good here. Of course, there is some great atmospheric horror and some great jump scares, but a lot of the horror here is also very psychological. It's really well balanced overall. But by far the biggest positive with this film is the acting. Elizabeth Moss' performance here is incredible. She has to portray the role of a character who has been dealing with abuse for a large portion of her life, and she's escaped this situation very paranoid. Even though she's living in a very comfortable home, she still always feels on edge, like her husband could still be stalking her or in control of her in some way, and you constantly feel on edge because her performance is so great. When she's looking at the wall as though an invisible man is there, you really feel like an invisible man is there because her performance is that good. She is so good here, I cannot stress that enough. And Aldous Hodge delivers an excellent performance as James Lanier, as he's growing increasingly suspicious of Cecilia and getting drawn away from her. All the acting across the board here is fantastic. I loved it. Another thing that gives this film such a big boost is that these characters are not only portrayed by great actors, but they're characters that you can really care for because they're well written. They're developed so well throughout this film. You actually relate to them as human beings, and you care for them because they care for each other. They do feel like real human beings. And that's something a lot of horror films are lacking in, is characters you can genuinely relate to and care for. But this film nails it. You really do care for these characters and feel on edge because of it. Another major positive that's really notable here is when you look at a lot of other slasher films, you get a lot of suspense off of POV shots of the killer stalking people or killers just barely being seen in the frame. That's very creepy and suspenseful, especially with Halloween. They do it masterfully. But with the film where the villain, the killer, is completely invisible, you can't actually see him, it's much tougher to actually generate atmosphere, especially if you don't actually have any POV shots of the killer in the film. But this film manages to nail it. They have some excellent cinematography here, not only from the opening scene alone, where they have a great tracking shot with some excellent camera work and constantly shifting low-key lighting that's really effective. They managed to set a great atmosphere and suspense just from the opening scene alone. It's so effective. This film overall has some really smooth camera work throughout and some excellent lighting. You're also really questioning if there's something potentially in the background, like the Invisible Man, where he possibly be within the frame, especially when Elizabeth Moss is looking somewhere in particular. You're looking through the entire frame to see if the Invisible Man might be there or something is off, you know what I mean? It's so effective. Overall, this is a very underrated horror film. It's my favorite horror film from 2020, and I strongly encourage you to check this one out. I'm giving The Invisible Man 2020 Oh, an A minus. So I will be going into spoiler territory to point out some nitpicks I have with this film, because this is not a film without flaws. But if you haven't seen this film yourself, then click away from this video and go watch it. So there's a scene where Cecilia and Sydney are sitting across in a room together, and basically Sydney gets punched by the Invisible Man, but she suspects that Cecilia punched her, even though she was too far away to have been able to do it. So it just doesn't make sense that she would automatically suspect that she did it and not suspect that there's some foul play going on, that there's something off. There's also a dinner table scene where Cecilia is talking to her sister about proof that she has of what's going on and how it's real. But basically, Adrian gets a knife in his invisible suit and slits her sister's throat, but no one in the entire restaurant notices it right up until the moment that Adrian gives the knife to Cecilia. Like, it doesn't make any sense that no one would notice a knife literally floating in the air because of a guy in an invisible suit picking it up and then slitting her throat. But those are just some minor screenplay writing issues for those particular scenes. For the most part, this film is a masterpiece. I loved this film. And as always, I hope you enjoyed this review. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you want to see more. And I will see you in the next video.